A billionaire widow sees a construction worker and whispers, "You're beautiful." He blushes, she gasps, and in that moment, two completely different worlds collide forever. She'll lose her mansion, her fortune, everything, but gain the one thing money can't buy. This is Mason and Victoria's story of love conquering all. Have you ever felt love at first sight? Tell me in the comments. The scorching August sun beat down mercilessly on the construction site as Mason Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his weathered brow. At 32, he had spent 15 years perfecting his craft, building walls that would stand the test of time. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision as he laid each brick with the care of an artist creating a masterpiece. "Mason, you're going to give yourself a heart attack in this heat," called out his longtime friend and co-worker Danny from across the worksite where he was mixing cement. Mason chuckled, his deep brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he adjusted his hard hat. "Better to die doing what you love than living doing what you hate," he replied, his voice carrying the slight accent inherited from his Mexican grandmother, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. The massive estate they were working on belonged to the Whitmore family, old money that stretched back 5 generations in Connecticut. Mason had heard whispers about the current owner. A woman who had inherited everything after a tragic skiing accident claimed her husband's life 3 years ago in Aspen. He minded his own business, focusing on the intricate stonework that would soon become a beautiful garden wall, separating the main house from the guest quarters. As he bent to retrieve another perfectly cut stone from the pile, Mason felt eyes upon him like a physical weight. Looking up slowly, he saw her for the first time, Victoria Whitmore, standing on the marble terrace overlooking the construction area, like a vision from a dream. Even from 50 feet away, she was absolutely breathtaking. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon sunlight like liquid fire, and her emerald silk dress seemed to float around her graceful figure like she was walking on air. Their eyes met across the distance, and something electric and powerful passed between them that neither could explain. Mason's heart hammered against his ribs, as if trying to escape his chest. He had never believed in love at first sight. His grandmother had always told him it was fairy tale nonsense. Until this very moment. The world seemed to slow down to a crawl, the sounds of construction machinery fading to a distant whisper as he found himself drowning in her mesmerizing gaze. Victoria Whitmore, at 28, had spent the last 3 years drowning in overwhelming grief and crushing loneliness. The 30-room mansion felt more like a beautiful prison than a home, filled with memories of a husband she had cared for, but never truly loved with passion. But something about the rugged man working on her garden wall made her feel genuinely alive for the first time since David's funeral. "Excuse me," she called out, her melodious voice carrying across the yard like the sweetest music Mason had ever heard. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he carefully set down his tools and walked toward the terrace, his heavy work boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel path. Each step felt like walking through thick quicksand, his usual rock-solid confidence evaporating completely under her intense, penetrating gaze. He had built walls for movie stars and politicians, but none of them had ever made him feel this nervous. "Ma'am," he managed to say, removing his hard hat and revealing thick, dark hair damp with honest perspiration. Victoria's breath caught painfully in her throat. Up close, he was even more devastatingly handsome, rugged features that spoke of genuine strength and unshakable integrity, eyes that held incredible depth and natural kindness that couldn't be faked. "I just wanted to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it, "that you're absolutely beautiful." Mason's face flushed deep red like a teenager, and he looked down at his dusty work boots in embarrassment. Thank you, ma'am. I should really get back to work before my boss sees me slacking off." But as he turned to leave, Victoria called out again, unable to let him go. "Wait, what's your name?" "Mason Rodriguez, ma'am," he replied, turning back to face her with obvious reluctance. "Mason," she repeated slowly, as if testing how the name felt on her tongue, savoring each syllable. "I'm Victoria Whitmore." The way she said his name with such warmth sent electric shivers down his spine, and Mason knew in that life-changing moment that nothing would ever be the same again. That evening, Mason sat in his modest studio apartment, a converted garage behind his elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's Victorian house, staring at his weathered reflection in the small bathroom mirror. He couldn't shake the haunting image of Victoria Whitmore from his mind, the way her incredible green eyes had seemed to see straight through to his very soul. The musical quality of her voice when she spoke his name like it was something precious. "You're completely losing your mind, Rodriguez," he muttered to himself, splashing ice-cold water on his face in a futile attempt to clear his thoughts. She's a billionaire heiress, and you repair walls for a living. Get real. His phone buzzed insistently with a text from his younger sister, Maria. Still coming to Sunday dinner tomorrow? Mom's making your favorite tamales, and Dad wants to show you his new power tools he bought at the hardware store. Mason smiled genuinely for the first time all day, typing back quickly. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Tell Mom and Dad I love them both and can't wait to see everyone. Family had always been everything to Mason Rodriguez. Growing up in a tight-knit working-class neighborhood in East Los Angeles, he had learned the fundamental values of hard work, loyalty, and integrity from his adoptive parents, Elena and Carlos Hernandez, who had taken him in after his biological parents died tragically in a drunk driving accident when he was just 12 years old. Carlos had worked construction his entire adult life until severe arthritis forced him into early retirement at 55, and Elena still worked diligently at the local elementary school as head custodian, taking pride in keeping the building spotless for the children she adored. Mason had been the first person in either family to graduate high school with honors, though college had been completely financially impossible despite his excellent grades and teachers' recommendations. Instead of pursuing higher education, he had eagerly apprenticed under his adoptive father, learning not just the crucial technical skills of construction, but the deep pride and satisfaction that came with building something beautiful and lasting with your own two hands. Meanwhile, across town in her enormous mansion, Victoria paced restlessly around her spacious bedroom, completely unable to sleep despite the late hour. The brief but intense encounter with Mason had awakened something powerful she thought had died permanently with her husband 3 years ago. David Whitmore had been her college sweetheart at Yale, a genuinely kind man from another established wealthy family who understood perfectly the social pressures and expectations of their privileged circle. Their marriage had been comfortable and stable, built on solid friendship and mutual respect, rather than earth-shaking passion or consuming desire. But what she had felt looking into Mason's soulful eyes was entirely different. Raw, electric, dangerous, and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. Victoria walked slowly to her floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the expansive garden, where construction would resume bright and early tomorrow morning. She had inherited the entire massive Whitmore fortune at 25, when David died suddenly in that horrible skiing accident in Aspen. The crushing guilt still consumed her daily. She hadn't even loved him the way he truly deserved. Yet she had inherited everything, while he had lost his life. The next morning, Mason arrived at the exclusive work site 30 minutes early, desperately hoping to lose himself in the familiar, comforting rhythm of laying stone and mixing mortar. But as he began measuring and cutting materials with mechanical precision, he sensed her magnetic presence before he actually saw her approaching. Victoria walked toward him, carrying an elegant silver tray with a tall glass of ice water, fresh fruit, and homemade sandwiches. She wore simple designer jeans and a crisp white blouse, looking infinitely more approachable than the previous day, though no less breathtakingly beautiful in the morning sunlight. "I thought you might be thirsty and hungry," she said softly, setting the tray carefully on a nearby wooden table, with genuine concern in her voice. Mason's mouth went completely dry, but definitely not from thirst. That's incredibly kind of you, Mrs. Whitmore, but you really didn't need to go to all this trouble for me. Victoria," she corrected gently but firmly. "Please just call me Victoria. And I wanted to do this. I've been watching you work from my window. You put such incredible care and attention into everything you do. It's truly inspiring." Mason felt that familiar, uncomfortable heat creeping steadily up his neck and face. "It's just bricks and mortar, ma'am, Victoria. Nothing special or inspiring about it." "No," she said with surprising firmness and conviction. "It's genuine art. You're creating something absolutely beautiful that will last long after we're both gone from this world." Their fingers brushed accidentally as he reached for the water glass, and the simple contact sent powerful electricity shooting through both of them like lightning. Mason pulled his hand back quickly as if burned, nearly dropping the glass in his nervousness and embarrassment. Over the next week, Victoria found herself inventing increasingly elaborate excuses to visit the garden multiple times throughout each day. She brought gourmet lunch for the entire construction crew, asked detailed technical questions about the building process, and always somehow managed to position herself strategically where she could watch Mason work with growing fascination and undeniable attraction. Mason was acutely and painfully aware of her presence every single second she was near. His hands, usually rock-steady and completely sure after 15 years of experience, trembled noticeably whenever she came within 20 feet of him. He caught himself unconsciously flexing his muscles when he felt her eyes watching him, and Danny had started giving him knowing, amused looks that made him want to crawl into a deep hole and disappear forever. "The boss lady is definitely sweet on you, my friend," Danny announced during their lunch break on Friday, nodding obviously toward the marble terrace where Victoria stood pretending to read an expensive hardcover book, while stealing frequent glances at Mason working shirtless in the afternoon heat. "Don't be completely ridiculous, Danny," Mason muttered unconvincingly, but his traitorous eyes betrayed him by automatically seeking her out like a magnetic compass finding true north. "Listen, man, I've been happily married to my Rosa for 22 wonderful years, and I raised 3 daughters. I definitely know what that particular look means when a woman gives it to a man," Danny persisted with a wide grin. "The real question is, what exactly are you planning to do about this obvious situation?" "Absolutely nothing," Mason said with forced firmness, trying to convince himself as much as Danny. "She's completely out of my league in every possible way. Hell, she's not even playing the same sport as me. She's major league, and I'm not even little league." But even as he spoke those words with conviction, Mason found himself wondering constantly what it would feel like to run his fingers through her silky auburn hair, to hold her close against his chest, and protect her from whatever deep sadness he sometimes glimpsed in her beautiful green eyes when she thought no one was watching. Victoria, meanwhile, was fighting her own intense internal battle with growing desperation. She had tried repeatedly to stay away from the construction site, telling herself sternly that her feelings were completely inappropriate and utterly impossible to pursue. But every morning, without fail, she found herself standing at her bedroom window, waiting anxiously for the familiar sound of Mason's battered pickup truck pulling into her circular driveway. Every afternoon, she invented new reasons to walk casually past the garden where he worked. Her longtime best friend, Caroline Ashford, had immediately noticed the dramatic change during their weekly lunch at the exclusive Meadowbrook Country Club, where they had been members since childhood. "You're practically glowing, Victoria," Caroline observed carefully, studying her friend over her Caesar salad with obvious curiosity. "Something is definitely different about you lately. What's changed in your life?" Victoria nearly choked on her expensive wine, coughing delicately. "Nothing's changed at all, Caroline. I'm just getting better sleep lately. That's all." "That's complete bullshit, and you know it," Caroline said with her characteristic bluntness that had gotten them both in trouble during their boarding school days at Miss Porter's. "I've known you since we were 14 years old. Victoria Elizabeth Whitmore. You're falling hard for someone, and I want to know everything. Who is this mysterious man?" Victoria's telling silence and deep blush were answer enough for her perceptive friend. "Oh my God, you absolutely are. This is incredible. Tell me everything immediately. Is he someone from the hospital charity board? Maybe that handsome new attorney at Daddy's law firm downtown?" It's extremely complicated, Caroline," Victoria whispered, looking around nervously to make sure no other country club members could overhear their conversation. That same afternoon, Victoria made a decision that simultaneously terrified and exhilarated her beyond description. She waited patiently until all the other construction workers had packed up their tools and left for the day, then approached Mason as he meticulously cleaned his equipment with the same careful attention he gave everything else. "Mason, could I possibly talk to you privately for just a moment?" she asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. He looked up in genuine surprise to find her standing so close. He could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something uniquely her. The late afternoon sunlight created a stunning halo effect in her hair, and he had to grip his tools tighter to keep from reaching out to touch her face. "Of course, Mrs. Victoria," he corrected himself quickly. "I know this is going to sound strange and probably inappropriate," she began nervously, her usual confidence wavering dangerously under his intense, focused gaze. "But would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Not here at the house," she added quickly, seeing his eyes widen in shock. "Somewhere completely neutral and casual. There's a small family cafe downtown that I heard makes absolutely excellent, authentic Mexican food." Mason stared at her in complete disbelief, certain he had misunderstood her words. "You want to have dinner? With me? Are you serious?" "Yes," she said simply, her voice barely audible. "Tonight at 7, if you're free and interested." Mason's mind raced frantically. Every rational thought screamed at him to politely decline, to maintain the appropriate professional distance between employer and employee. But looking into her hopeful, vulnerable eyes, he found himself nodding slowly. Yes, I would really like that very much. Victoria's radiant smile could have powered the entire mansion for a week. Saturday evening found Mason standing in front of his tiny closet in complete panic, staring at his limited wardrobe options with growing desperation. He owned exactly 3 outfits that weren't work clothes. A navy blue suit he'd bought for his cousin Miguel's wedding 5 years ago that still had the tags on it, a pair of khaki pants with a light blue polo shirt, and dark jeans with a crisp button-down shirt his sister Maria had given him for Christmas last year. The jeans and shirt, he decided finally after changing clothes 3 times, running his hands nervously through his freshly washed and carefully styled hair. She said casual, so jeans should be appropriate, right? He spent an additional 20 minutes in the bathroom, shaving twice to make sure he didn't have any stubble, brushing his teeth until his gums were sore, and applying the cologne his nephew had bought him for his birthday that he'd never had occasion to use before tonight. 45 minutes later, he stood outside Café Luna on Maple Street, his palms sweating profusely despite the pleasantly cool evening air. The restaurant was small and intimately lit, with warm yellow lighting and the incredible scent of authentic Mexican spices wafting through the air and making his mouth water. He spotted Victoria immediately. She sat alone at a corner table, nervously smoothing her yellow sundress and checking her watch repeatedly. When she looked up and saw him walking through the door, her entire face lit up with such genuine happiness and relief that Mason felt his anxiety begin to ease significantly for the first time all day. "You came," she said softly, as he approached the table, her voice filled with wonder, as if she truly hadn't believed he would show up. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" he asked gently, holding out her chair like his adoptive mother Elena had taught him was proper manners for treating a lady. "I wasn't completely sure," she admitted honestly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that made his heart skip a beat. "I've been sitting here for 30 minutes, watching the door, and second-guessing myself constantly." Mason settled into the chair across from her, marveling at how beautiful she looked in the soft candlelight. "I've been looking forward to this all day. Actually, I've been nervous as hell all day, but definitely looking forward to it." Victoria laughed, and the sound was like music to his ears. "You were nervous? I changed clothes 4 times and nearly canceled twice on the drive over here. A woman like you, nervous about having dinner with a guy like me?" Mason shook his head in amazement. "That doesn't make any sense at all." "A woman like me?" Victoria raised an eyebrow questioningly. "What exactly does that mean?" Mason gestured helplessly with his hands. "Beautiful, intelligent, successful, sophisticated. You could have dinner with anyone in the world. Why would you choose me?" "Because," Victoria said quietly, leaning forward slightly and looking directly into his eyes, "in all my 28 years, no one has ever made me feel the way I felt when I first saw you working in my garden. You took my breath away completely." Mason felt heat rise in his cheeks again. "I'm just a construction worker, Victoria. I didn't even finish high school until I was 19, and I've never been to college. We come from completely different worlds." "Maybe that's exactly why this feels so right," she said softly. "My world is full of people who say what they think you want to hear, who want something from me or my money. But you, when you look at me, I feel like you see me, the real me, not just the Whitmore name or the bank account." The waitress approached their table, interrupting the intense moment. "Welcome to Café Luna. Can I start you folks with some drinks tonight?" Mason looked at Victoria. "Would you like some wine? Or maybe a margarita?" "Actually," Victoria said with a mischievous smile, "I've never had a real Mexican beer. Could you recommend one?" Mason grinned widely, his first completely relaxed smile of the evening. "2 Coronas with lime, please," he told the waitress, then looked back at Victoria. "You're in for a treat." As they waited for their drinks, Victoria asked, "Tell me about your family, Mason. I want to know everything about you." Mason's expression grew thoughtful and somewhat sad. "Well, my biological parents died in a car accident when I was 12. They were coming home from their anniversary dinner when a drunk driver ran a red light." Victoria's hand instinctively reached across the table to cover his. "Oh, Mason, I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was the worst thing I could imagine at the time," Mason admitted, surprised by how natural her touch felt. "But then Elena and Carlos Hernandez took me in. They already had 2 kids of their own, but they opened their home and hearts to me without hesitation. They saved my life in every way that matters." The conversation flowed as naturally as water between them throughout dinner. Victoria found herself telling Mason things she had never shared with anyone. Her loneliness in the mansion, Her guilt over inheriting so much money from a man she had cared for but never passionately loved, her secret dreams of doing something meaningful with her life beyond charity galas and board meetings. Mason listened intently, never judging, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze her hand when emotion threatened to overwhelm her. In return, he opened up about his struggles growing up without his biological parents, his deep love for the family who had adopted him, and his pride in working with his hands to create something lasting and beautiful. "I know it probably sounds silly to someone like you," Mason said, twirling pasta around his fork, "but when I finish building a wall or completing a project, I feel this incredible sense of accomplishment, like I've left my mark on the world in a positive way." "It doesn't sound silly at all," Victoria said earnestly, her eyes shining with admiration. "It sounds wonderful. I envy you that feeling. Actually, most of what I do feels meaningless. Writing checks, attending meetings, cutting ribbons at charity events. It's all important work, I suppose, but it doesn't feel personal." "What would you do if money wasn't a factor?" Mason asked. "If you could wake up tomorrow and pursue any dream, what would it be?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, staring at her wine glass as if the answer might be written there. I think I'd want to teach. Elementary school, maybe. Help kids who are struggling the way you must have struggled after losing your parents." Mason's face lit up with genuine excitement. "That would be amazing. You'd be incredible at that. Have you ever thought about actually doing it?" "It's complicated," Victoria sighed. "The Whitmore Foundation requires a lot of my time, and there are social expectations, family obligations. Plus, I'd need to go back to school to get my teaching certification, and people would think I'm crazy for giving up this lifestyle to work in public education." "Who cares what people think?" Mason said with passionate conviction. "It's your life, Victoria. You should spend it doing something that makes you happy." Their eyes met across the table, and the air between them seemed to crackle with electricity and unspoken possibilities. "Dance with me," Victoria said suddenly, as the mariachi band began playing a slow, romantic song. Mason's eyes widened in panic. I don't really know how to dance. Not properly, anyway." "Neither do I, really," Victoria admitted with a laugh. "All those cotillion lessons when I was younger. But I've never danced with someone I actually wanted to be close to." Before Mason could protest further, Victoria stood and extended her hand to him. The small dance floor was nearly empty, just one other couple swaying slowly to the music. Mason stood up reluctantly, taking her small hand in his much larger, calloused one. As they moved together on the dance floor, Victoria fitting perfectly against Mason's chest, the rest of the world seemed to disappear completely. Mason had never felt anything like the warmth that spread through his entire body as Victoria's arms encircled his neck, her fingers playing gently with the hair at the base of his skull. "This feels like a dream," Victoria whispered against his ear, sending shivers down his spine, like something that happens to other people, but never to me. "If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up," Mason replied, his voice rough with emotion as he pulled her slightly closer, breathing in the intoxicating scent of her hair. They danced through 3 songs, completely lost in each other and oblivious to the other restaurant patrons. When the music finally stopped, they remained holding each other for several long moments, neither wanting to break the magical spell that had been woven around them. "I should probably get you home," Mason said reluctantly, though every fiber of his being wanted to stay exactly where they were, forever. "I suppose you're right," Victoria agreed sadly, but made no move to step out of his arms. During the drive back to her mansion in Mason's battered pickup truck, Victoria reached over and took his hand, intertwining their fingers as they sat at red lights. The gesture was simple but intimate, and Mason found himself memorizing every detail: the softness of her skin, the way her thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand, the contentment on her face as she watched the city lights pass by outside the window. When they reached the gates of her estate, Mason parked the truck and walked around to open her door, helping her down from the high cab. They stood there in the moonlight for several minutes, neither wanting the evening to end. "Thank you for tonight," Victoria said softly, looking up into his eyes. "It was the most wonderful time I've had in years." "Thank you for asking me," Mason replied, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I can't remember when I've been happier." Victoria rose up on her tiptoes and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to his lips. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was sweet and perfect and full of promise. "Good night, Mason," she whispered against his lips. "Good night, Victoria," he whispered back, already counting the hours until he would see her again. As he drove away, Mason caught sight of her in his rearview mirror, standing in the moonlight watching his truck disappear into the night. His heart was so full of happiness and hope that he thought it might burst. And for the first time in his life, Mason Rodriguez believed in fairy tale endings. The next morning, Mason arrived at work 30 minutes early, but Victoria was already waiting for him on the terrace with coffee and fresh pastries from the expensive bakery downtown. She wore a flowing white dress that made her look like an angel in the morning sunlight. And when she smiled at him, Mason felt his knees go weak all over again. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted as he approached, her cheeks pink with embarrassment. "I kept replaying every moment of last night over and over in my mind." "Me too," Mason confessed, accepting the steaming cup of coffee gratefully. "Best insomnia I've ever had." They spent the morning working side by side, Victoria asking questions about masonry, while Mason patiently explained the intricacies of his craft. She had soft hands that had never known hard labor, but she was eager to learn and insisted on helping him carry stones and mix mortar despite his protests. "You're going to ruin that beautiful dress," Mason warned, as she knelt beside him to examine his work more closely. "It's just a dress," Victoria said with a shrug. "I have dozens of them, but I'll never have another morning like this one." Danny and the other workers exchanged knowing glances, but kept their comments to themselves, though Mason could feel their amused stares throughout the day. Around noon, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the circular driveway, and Victoria's expression immediately changed from joy to apprehension. "Who's that?" Mason asked, noting her sudden tension. "My mother-in-law," Victoria said quietly. "Margaret Whitmore. She still considers herself the matriarch of the family, even though David is gone." An elegant woman in her 60s emerged from the car, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expensive suit immaculate despite the heat. Margaret Whitmore surveyed the construction site with obvious distaste, before her cold blue eyes settled on Victoria and Mason standing close together. "Victoria, darling," Margaret said in a voice that could freeze water. "I wasn't expecting to find you playing in the dirt." "Hello, Margaret," Victoria replied, her voice noticeably cooler. "I was just learning about the construction process. It's fascinating." Margaret's gaze shifted to Mason, taking in his work clothes and dusty appearance with barely concealed disdain. "And you are?" "Mason Rodriguez, ma'am," Mason replied politely, extending his hand even though he could sense her reluctance to take it. Margaret ignored his outstretched hand completely. "Victoria, could I speak with you privately?" "Inside?" Victoria glanced at Mason apologetically before following Margaret toward the house. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the living room, Mason could see them engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Margaret was gesturing dramatically while Victoria stood with her arms crossed defensively. 20 minutes later, Victoria emerged alone, her face flushed and her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Is everything all right?" Mason asked with concern, wanting nothing more than to pull her into his arms and comfort her. "She knows," Victoria said simply. "Someone from the country club saw us at dinner last night and called her immediately. She's not pleased with my choice of dining companions." Mason felt his heart sink. "What did she say?" "Things that don't matter," Victoria said firmly, though Mason could see how much the conversation had hurt her. "She threatened to have the board review my position with the foundation, suggested I might need professional help for what she called my obvious emotional breakdown, and strongly recommended I take a vacation to clear my head." "Maybe you should listen to her," Mason said quietly, hating himself for the words but knowing they were probably true. "Maybe this is all happening too fast." Victoria's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with determination. "Don't you dare, Mason Rodriguez. Don't you dare let that woman's poison get into your head. What's happening between us is real and beautiful and worth fighting for." "But she's right about one thing," Mason insisted, his practical nature warring with his heart. "We are from different worlds. Your friends, your family, your social circle, they're never going to accept someone like me. Then maybe I don't need that social circle," Victoria said fiercely. "Maybe I need something real instead of all the artificial politeness and fake relationships I've been surrounded by my entire life." Before Mason could respond, Victoria closed the distance between them and kissed him passionately right there in front of the mansion, in full view of anyone who might be watching from the windows. This kiss was different from the gentle one they had shared the night before. It was desperate and claiming and full of defiant love. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victoria looked directly into his eyes and said the words that would change both their lives forever. I love you, Mason Rodriguez. I don't care who knows it. Mason stared at her in wonder, hardly able to believe what he was hearing. Victoria, you don't have to say it back, she interrupted quickly. Not yet, but I needed you to know how I feel. Life is too short and too precious to waste time pretending or playing games or caring what other people think. As Mason looked into her beautiful, determined face, he realized that Victoria Whitmore was the strongest, most courageous woman he had ever met. And in that moment, he knew without a doubt that he was completely, irrevocably, and eternally in love with her too. The question was, would love be enough to overcome all the obstacles that stood in their way? That evening, Mason sat in his small apartment staring at his phone, Victoria's words echoing in his mind like a beautiful melody he couldn't stop hearing. I love you, Mason Rodriguez. No woman had ever said those words to him with such fierce conviction, such raw honesty, that it took his breath away completely. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Mason, Mijo, you sound different, his adoptive mother Elena said the moment he answered. Something wonderful has happened, hasn't it? Mason couldn't hide anything from the woman who had raised him with such love and wisdom. Mama, I think I'm in trouble. The good kind of trouble, but still trouble. Tell me everything, Elena commanded in the tone that brooked no argument. For the next hour, Mason found himself confessing everything about Victoria. Their first meeting, the dinner, the way she made him feel like he could conquer the world with his bare hands. Elena listened without judgment, occasionally making small sounds of understanding. She told you she loves you, and you didn't say it back? Elena asked when he finished. I wanted to, Mama. But what if this is all some kind of fantasy? What if she wakes up tomorrow and realizes she's made a terrible mistake? Mason Eduardo Rodriguez, Elena said firmly, using his full name the way she did when he was being stubborn as a child. That girl looked past everything society told her to see and chose to love your heart. If you don't tell her how you feel, you're the one making the terrible mistake. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria paced her bedroom like a caged lioness, replaying the confrontation with Margaret over and over. Her mother-in-law had been vicious, threatening everything Victoria held dear if she continued this embarrassing association with the help. You're destroying David's memory, Margaret had spat, rolling around in the dirt with some common laborer while wearing his ring on your finger. Victoria looked down at the diamond wedding band she still wore out of habit, rather than love. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped it off her finger for the first time in 3 years and placed it carefully in her jewelry box. The action felt like shedding an old skin, finally becoming the woman she was meant to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. Heard about the drama with Margaret. Are you okay? Want me to come over with wine and ice cream? Victoria smiled, typing back, I'm better than okay. I'm free. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Mason was working alone, mixing cement, when 3 expensive cars pulled into the driveway simultaneously. Victoria's face went pale as she recognized them. Board members from the Whitmore Foundation, led by Margaret herself. This is bad, Victoria whispered to Mason as the group approached. Very bad. Margaret stepped forward like a general leading troops into battle. Victoria, we need to discuss your recent behavior and its impact on the Foundation's reputation. My personal life has nothing to do with the Foundation, Victoria replied, moving to stand beside Mason protectively. Everything you do reflects on the Whitmore name, said Harrison Brooks, the Foundation's treasurer and Margaret's longtime ally. Donors are already asking questions about your judgment. Mason felt the familiar burn of shame and inadequacy rising in his chest. These people in their $1,000 suits were looking at him like he was dirt on their expensive shoes. Maybe I should go, Mason said quietly to Victoria. No, Victoria said firmly, taking his hand in front of everyone. You stay exactly where you are. Margaret's eyes narrowed dangerously. Victoria, if you continue this inappropriate relationship, the board will have no choice but to remove you from your position as Foundation Director. Think carefully about what you're throwing away for a few moments of excitement. I am thinking clearly, Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the trembling Mason could feel in her hand. For the first time in years, I'm thinking with perfect clarity. Then you choose him over your family's legacy? Margaret demanded. Victoria looked at Mason, seeing not a construction worker, but the man who had awakened her heart, who listened to her dreams, who made her laugh and feel genuinely alive. I choose love over everything else. The board members exchanged shocked glances. Margaret's face turned red with rage. Then you've made your choice. You'll hear from our attorneys by the end of the week." As the cars pulled away, leaving dust clouds in their wake, Victoria felt strangely light, despite having just lost everything she thought defined her. "Victoria, what have you done?" Mason asked, his voice filled with anguish. "You just sacrificed everything for me." "No," Victoria said, turning to face him with tears streaming down her face but smiling through them. "I just chose everything that really matters." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried for the life she was leaving behind and the uncertain future they would face together. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in the unemployment office in downtown Hartford, surrounded by people who were struggling to make ends meet, people whose problems made her foundation drama seem insignificant. She had been officially removed from her position, her trust fund frozen pending legal review, and her access to the mansion revoked until the estate lawyers could sort out the complex inheritance laws. "Next," called the board clerk behind the bulletproof glass. Victoria approached the window, still wearing one of her expensive dresses because it was all she had. The clerk looked her up and down with obvious skepticism. "You're here to file for unemployment benefits?" the woman asked incredulously. "Yes," Victoria replied, trying to keep her dignity intact. "I was recently let go from my position." Meanwhile, Mason was dealing with his own crisis. Word had spread quickly through the construction community about his relationship with Victoria Whitmore, and suddenly, job offers had dried up completely. Wealthy clients didn't want a contractor who might get ideas above his station, and working-class clients couldn't afford to pay him enough to live on. "I'm sorry, Mason," his current boss, Tony Marcelli, said with genuine regret. "You're the best stonemason I've ever worked with, but I can't afford to lose contracts over this situation. You understand?" Mason nodded, swallowing his pride. "I understand, Tony. Thanks for being straight with me." That evening, Mason found Victoria sitting on the steps of his apartment building, looking lost and vulnerable in a way that broke his heart into 1,000,000 pieces. "How did you find me?" he asked, sitting beside her and immediately pulling her close. "I asked around the construction sites until someone gave me your address," she said, leaning into his warmth. "I didn't know where else to go." "What do you mean?" Mason asked with growing concern. "They changed the locks on the house," Victoria explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret had me legally evicted. Apparently David's will had some clauses I never knew about regarding moral conduct and appropriate behavior befitting the Whitmore name." Mason felt rage boiling in his chest. "They threw you out? With nothing?" "I have my car and whatever clothes I could grab before security escorted me off the property," Victoria said with a bitter laugh. "Oh, and $47 in my checking account." "Jesus, Victoria, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "Stop," Victoria said firmly, turning to look at him directly. "This is not your fault. This is the result of a toxic family system that I should have escaped years ago." Mason studied her face in the dim porch light. Despite everything she had lost, there was something different about her, a lightness, a freedom he had never seen before. "So what do we do now?" he asked. Victoria smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen from her in weeks. "Now we build something new, together." Over the next month, they created a life neither had expected, but both cherished deeply. Victoria moved into Mason's tiny apartment, sleeping on his couch at first until they both admitted they wanted to share his bed. She took a job waitressing at a family diner near the construction sites, using skills she never knew she had, and discovering she actually enjoyed the honest work and genuine interactions with regular people. Mason started his own small business, doing handyman work and small renovation projects for middle-class families who appreciated his skill and integrity. The money was tight, but they were happier than either had ever been in their previous lives. "I never knew scrambled eggs could taste this good," Victoria said one morning, sitting at Mason's tiny kitchen table, wearing one of his work shirts, and looking more beautiful than she ever had in her designer gowns. "That's because they're made with love instead of obligation," Mason replied, kissing the top of her head as he set a plate in front of her. "Mason," Victoria said seriously, taking his hand as he sat down across from her, "I need to tell you something important." Mason's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I've never been happier in my entire life," she said simply. "I know we don't have much money, and I know this apartment is smaller than my old walk-in closet, but I wake up every morning grateful to be exactly where I am." Mason brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you, Victoria. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was scared." "Scared of what?" she asked softly. "Scared that if I said it out loud, This whole beautiful dream would disappear, Mason admitted. Well, I love you too, Victoria said with a radiant smile. And dreams don't disappear when they're real. As they sat in the morning sunlight streaming through the small window, sharing breakfast and planning their day, both Mason and Victoria knew they had found something precious, a love built on truth, respect, and genuine partnership, rather than social expectations or financial security. But neither of them knew that their greatest test was still coming. 6 months after Victoria lost everything, they had built a life filled with simple pleasures and deep contentment. Mason's business was growing steadily through word-of-mouth recommendations, and Victoria had been promoted to assistant manager at the diner. They were saving money for a small house with a garden where Victoria could plant flowers and Mason could build her anything her heart desired. Their quiet happiness was shattered on a Tuesday morning when Victoria collapsed at work. "Victoria!" shouted Linda, the head cook, as Victoria crumpled behind the counter, her face pale and her breathing shallow. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but to Mason, waiting anxiously in the hospital corridor still wearing his work clothes, those minutes felt like hours. When Dr. Sarah Chen finally emerged from the examination room, her expression was serious but not grave. "Mr. Rodriguez, your girlfriend is going to be fine, but I need to discuss her condition with you both." Mason's heart pounded as he followed the doctor into Victoria's room, where she lay looking small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. "Victoria, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" Mason asked, taking her hand immediately. "Embarrassed," Victoria said with a weak smile. "I've never fainted in my life." Dr. Chen consulted her chart. "Miss Whitmore, when was your last menstrual period?" Victoria's eyes widened as she did quick mental calculations. Oh my God. I've been so stressed and busy, I didn't even think. It's been almost 2 months. The blood test confirms what I suspected," Dr. Chen said gently. "You're approximately 8 weeks pregnant." The room fell completely silent except for the beeping of medical equipment. Mason stared at Victoria in shock, his mind racing through the implications. Victoria looked stunned, her free hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Pregnant," Victoria whispered, as if testing the word. "We're going to have a baby." Mason felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Not because he wasn't happy. The idea of having a child with Victoria filled him with incredible joy, but because of the timing and their precarious financial situation. "This is wonderful news," Dr. Chen continued, "but I do want to discuss some concerns. Your recent stress levels and the significant lifestyle changes you've experienced could complicate the pregnancy. I'm going to recommend some modifications to your work schedule and diet." After the doctor left, Mason and Victoria sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the life-changing news. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked finally, studying Mason's face with concern. "I'm scared," Mason admitted honestly. "Not about being a father. I want that more than anything, but scared about providing for a family when I can barely support the 2 of us." Victoria squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together. We always do." But their challenges were just beginning. That evening, as they walked into their apartment building, they found Margaret Whitmore waiting in the lobby, looking as imperious as ever in her black wool coat. "Victoria," Margaret said coldly, "we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Victoria replied, trying to move past her former mother-in-law. "You will when you hear what I have to offer," Margaret said smoothly. "I know about your condition." Victoria and Mason froze. "How could you possibly know that?" Margaret smiled without warmth. "I have connections everywhere, dear, including at Hartford General Hospital." Mason stepped protectively in front of Victoria. "What do you want?" "I want to make this situation right for everyone involved," Margaret said. "Victoria, you're carrying a Whitmore heir. That child deserves the life and opportunities that only the Whitmore name and fortune can provide." "Get to the point," Victoria said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm prepared to reinstate you fully. Your position, your trust fund, your place in the family, if you agree to end this inappropriate relationship and raise the child properly within our social circle." Victoria felt the room spinning. The offer was exactly what they needed financially. What would guarantee their child every advantage in life? "And if I refuse?" Victoria asked. Margaret's expression hardened. "Then you raise your bastard child in poverty while I make sure your boyfriend never works in this state again. I have that kind of influence, as you well know." Mason felt rage and helplessness warring in his chest. He could provide love and dedication, but he couldn't compete with the kind of security and opportunities Margaret was offering. I need time to think, Victoria said quietly. You have 24 hours, Margaret replied. After that, the offer expires permanently. As Margaret's car pulled away, Victoria leaned against Mason, feeling the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on her shoulders. What are we going to do? She whispered. Mason held her close, his own heart breaking as he realized that sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome every obstacle life threw in your path. That night, Victoria lay awake in Mason's arms, staring at the ceiling while he slept fitfully beside her. His breathing was irregular, and she knew he was wrestling with the same impossible thoughts that kept her eyes wide open in the darkness. At 3 a.m, she carefully extracted herself from his embrace and walked to the tiny kitchen, where she sat at their small table with a cup of herbal tea, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. Couldn't sleep either. Mason's voice came from the doorway. Victoria looked up to find him rumpled and exhausted, but still the most beautiful sight in the world to her. I keep thinking about what Margaret said, about the baby deserving every opportunity. Mason sat down across from her, reaching for her free hand. And what do you think? I think, Victoria said slowly, that our child will have something Margaret's money can't buy. Parents who love each other completely and chose each other against all odds. But what if that's not enough? Mason asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at him. What if love doesn't pay for college or health care or all the things a child needs? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Mason, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone. Mason squeezed her hand encouragingly. When David and I were trying to have children, before he died, I had 3 miscarriages, Victoria said, her voice barely audible. The doctors said it was stress-related. My body was rejecting pregnancy because I was so unhappy, so trapped in a life that felt like a beautiful cage. Mason felt his heart breaking for the pain she had carried alone. But this baby, Victoria continued, placing both their hands on her stomach, this baby was created from love and joy and freedom. This baby is thriving because we're thriving together. So what are you saying? Mason asked. Victoria looked directly into his eyes. I'm saying that I would rather raise our child in a 1-bedroom apartment filled with love than in a mansion filled with expectations and conditional acceptance. Mason felt tears welling up in his eyes. Are you sure? Because once we refuse Margaret's offer, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Victoria said firmly. But I need to know that you're sure too, because this decision affects all 3 of us. Mason stood up and knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. Victoria Elizabeth Whitmore, you and this baby are my whole world. I would work 3 jobs and live in a cardboard box if it meant we could stay together as a family. Victoria leaned down and kissed him softly. Then that's our answer. The next morning, they called Margaret together, using the speaker function on Victoria's phone so Mason could hear everything. I assume you're calling to accept my generous offer, Margaret said without preamble. No, Victoria said clearly. I'm calling to tell you that my family consists of Mason, our baby, and the life we're building together. I don't need your money or your approval. The silence on the other end was deafening. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Margaret finally said, her voice dripping with venom. No, Victoria replied calmly. I made that mistake 3 years ago, when I let fear and social pressure keep me in a marriage that was wrong for both David and me. I won't make that mistake again. Don't come crawling back when reality hits. Margaret spat before hanging up. Victoria and Mason looked at each other and burst into simultaneous laughter, giddy with relief and freedom. So what now? Mason asked. Now we plan a wedding, Victoria said with a mischievous smile. I want to marry you before this baby arrives, and I want to do it right, with your family, in a church, with promises that mean something. Mason's face lit up like Christmas morning. Are you proposing to me, Victoria Whitmore? I am, Victoria said, getting down on one knee in their tiny kitchen. Mason Rodriguez, will you marry me and help me raise this baby and build a life based on love instead of appearances? Yes, Mason said, pulling her up and spinning her around. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As they held each other in the morning sunlight, both knew they had chosen the harder path, but they also knew it was the right path, the only path that would lead to genuine happiness, and a family built on truth, love, and unwavering commitment to each other. Their greatest adventure was just beginning. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Victoria stood in the small bridal room of St. Maria's Catholic Church, adjusting the simple but elegant ivory dress she had found at a consignment shop for $50. She was 4 months pregnant now, just beginning to show, and had never felt more beautiful or more loved. "Mija, you look absolutely radiant," Elena said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around Victoria's neck, something Elena had worn at her own wedding 30 years ago, something borrowed. Maria, Mason's sister, pinned a small blue ribbon inside Victoria's dress. "Something blue," she announced with a grin. "And something new," added Carlos, Mason's adoptive father, presenting Victoria with a small bouquet of white roses he had grown himself, "for the daughter we always hoped Mason would bring home." Victoria's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. In the 3 months since they had refused Margaret's ultimatum, Mason's family had embraced her completely, treating her like the daughter they had never had. Elena had taught her to cook traditional Mexican dishes. Carlos had shown her how to tend a garden, and Maria had become the sister Victoria had always wanted. "Is everyone ready?" asked Father Miguel, the elderly priest who had baptized Mason and watched him grow up. "The groom looks like he might faint if we wait much longer," Victoria laughed, wiping away her happy tears. "I'm ready." The small church was packed with construction workers, diner employees, neighbors from their apartment building, and everyone who had become their chosen family over the past months. No society photographers, no designer gowns, no politicians or board members, just people who genuinely loved and supported them. As the music began and Victoria walked down the aisle on Carlos's arm, she saw Mason waiting at the altar in his best suit, his face glowing with such love and joy that she felt her heart might burst from happiness. "You look like an angel," Mason whispered, as Carlos placed her hand in his. "You look pretty good yourself, Mr. Rodriguez," Victoria whispered back, making him grin. Father Miguel began the ceremony with words in both English and Spanish, honoring both cultures that would shape their family. When it came time for vows, Mason and Victoria had written their own. "Victoria," Mason said, his voice strong and clear, "6 months ago, you looked at me and saw not a construction worker, but a man worthy of love. You taught me that the walls I build with my hands are nothing compared to the life we can build with our hearts. I promise to love you, protect you, and support your dreams for all the days of my life." Victoria's voice trembled with emotion as she replied, "Mason, you showed me what real love looks like, not based on money or status, but on respect, kindness, and genuine partnership. You gave me the courage to choose authenticity over appearance, love over security. I promise to stand by your side through every challenge and celebrate every joy for the rest of our lives." As they exchanged simple gold bands, bought with money they had saved together, Victoria felt a completeness she had never known was possible. "By the power vested in me by God and the state of Connecticut," Father Miguel announced with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mason, you may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was tender and full of promise, and the small church erupted in cheers and applause. At the reception in the church hall, decorated with flowers from Elena's garden and food prepared by the entire extended family, Victoria danced with her new husband to their song, the same mariachi tune they had danced to on their first date. "Any regrets?" Mason asked as they swayed together. Victoria's small bump pressed against his chest. "Only one," Victoria said, looking up at him with sparkling eyes. Mason's face showed immediate concern. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me 28 years to find you," Victoria said with a soft smile. As the evening wound down, Danny stood up to give a toast. "I've worked with Mason for 15 years, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been these past months." "Victoria, you didn't just marry a good man, you married the best man I know. And Mason, you found yourself a woman who sees your worth and isn't afraid to fight for love. Here's to building something beautiful together." As glasses were raised around the room, Victoria felt a sudden sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, doubling over slightly. "Victoria!" Mason caught her immediately. "What's wrong?" I don't know," Victoria said, fear creeping into her voice as the pain intensified. "Something's not right." Elena appeared at their side instantly. "We need to get her to the hospital. Now." As Mason carried Victoria to their car, both of them terrified about what this might mean for their baby and their future. Victoria whispered, "No matter what happens, this was the perfect day. We're married, Mason. We're a family." But as they raced through the night toward the hospital, both wondered if their happiness had been too good to last. The emergency room at Hartford General was a blur of bright lights, urgent voices, and the antiseptic smell that Victoria had come to associate with both crisis and hope. Dr. Chen appeared within minutes of their arrival, her face serious but calm, as she examined Victoria while Mason held her hand, both of them silent with fear. "The good news," Dr. Chen said after what felt like hours but was only 30 minutes, "is that the baby is fine. Strong heartbeat, normal movement. What you experienced was something called Braxton Hicks contractions, practice contractions that can be brought on by stress or excitement." Victoria and Mason both exhaled simultaneously, relief flooding through them like a physical force. "However," Dr. Chen continued, "I am concerned about your stress levels, Victoria. Your blood pressure is elevated, and given your history of pregnancy loss, I want to be very careful moving forward." "What does that mean?" Mason asked, his protective instincts on high alert. "It means modified bed rest for the next 2 weeks, reduced work hours after that, and very close monitoring. This baby is healthy and wants to be born, but we need to create the optimal environment for that to happen." As they drove home from the hospital in the early hours of the morning, still wearing their wedding clothes, Victoria leaned against Mason's shoulder and reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "A year ago, I was living in a mansion but felt completely dead inside," she said quietly. "Now I'm going home to a tiny apartment, and I've never felt more alive. A year ago, I thought love was something that happened to other people," Mason replied, kissing the top of her head. "I never imagined I could be this happy." 2 weeks later, Victoria was cleared to return to light work, and they settled into a rhythm that felt like the life they were meant to live. Mason's business continued to grow as word spread about his integrity and craftsmanship. Victoria reduced her hours at the diner but used the extra time to research early childhood education programs. She had decided to pursue her dream of teaching once the baby was old enough for daycare. On a sunny December morning, 6 months after their wedding, Victoria was organizing their small nursery when the doorbell rang. Mason answered it to find a well-dressed woman in her 50s, holding an expensive handbag and looking nervous. "Mr. Rodriguez, my name is Patricia Jameson. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Margaret Whitmore." Mason's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I have a letter for your wife. May I come in?" Victoria appeared in the doorway, now visibly pregnant at 7 months, glowing with health and happiness. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the attorney said, extending an envelope with the Whitmore family crest. "I'm sorry to inform you that Margaret Whitmore passed away 3 days ago from a sudden heart attack." Victoria took the letter with shaking hands, not sure how to feel about the news. Margaret had been cruel and manipulative, but she had also been David's mother, and the last connection to Victoria's former life. "There's more," Patricia continued. "Mrs. Whitmore left specific instructions in her will regarding you and your situation." Victoria opened the letter and read aloud. "Victoria, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and perhaps that's for the best. Watching you these past months, seeing you choose love over luxury, has forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own life and priorities. I spent so many years protecting the Whitmore legacy that I forgot the most important legacy of all, love and family. David would have wanted you to be happy, truly happy, in a way I don't think you ever were with him. I am therefore reinstating your full inheritance with one condition. You must promise to teach your children about their Whitmore heritage while allowing them to grow up with the kind of authentic love and values I see in your new family. The foundation will also be transferred back to your control, though I suspect you'll run it very differently than I did. Use the money to help families like your own, families who understand that wealth without love is just expensive emptiness. I also want to say that Mason Rodriguez is the kind of man David would have respected and admired. Take care of each other. Margaret." Victoria stared at the letter in shock, tears streaming down her face. "What does this mean exactly?" Mason asked the attorney. "It means Mrs. Rodriguez inherits approximately $47 million, the family mansion, and control of the Whitmore Foundation," Patricia explained. "Mrs. Whitmore was very specific that these assets come with no strings attached regarding your marriage or lifestyle choices." Mason sat down heavily, overwhelmed. "We don't need her money to be happy." "No," Victoria said, moving to sit beside him. "But think about what we could do with it. We could help families like ours, provide opportunities for children whose parents work with their hands and love with their hearts." That evening, as they walked through the mansion that would now be their home if they chose to accept it, Victoria turned to Mason in the beautiful garden where they had first met. "What do you think?" she asked. "Can we stay true to ourselves in a place like this?" Mason looked around at the grounds where he had once laid stones for wealthy people who looked through him. Now he saw potential. Space for Elena's expanded garden, room for Carlos's workshop, places where their children could run and play while still learning the values that really mattered. "I think," Mason said, pulling Victoria close, "that we can turn this house into a real home, fill it with the kind of love and laughter it's never known." 3 months later, Victoria gave birth to David Carlos Rodriguez, named for the man whose legacy had brought them together, and the grandfather who would teach him to work with his hands. As Mason held his son for the first time in the same hospital, where they had feared they might lose him, he marveled at how perfectly life had come together. Elena had moved into the mansion to help with the baby, and had indeed expanded her garden into something magnificent. Carlos had set up his workshop in the carriage house, and was already teaching neighborhood children woodworking skills. The Whitmore Foundation, under Victoria's leadership, now focused on supporting working families, funding education programs, and providing opportunities for people to lift themselves up through honest work and determination. "He's perfect," Victoria whispered, watching Mason cradle their son with infinite tenderness. "Like his mother," Mason replied, kissing both his wife and child. As they sat together in the morning sunlight streaming through the hospital window, Mason and Victoria knew they had built something extraordinary, not just a family, but a legacy of love that would last for generations. They had proven that when two hearts choose each other against all odds, when love is backed by courage and commitment, there is no obstacle too great to overcome. Their fairy tale was just beginning,